Hi, today we'll be looking at the body and loneliness and the connection between them. It might seem obvious, but there are some points that the course makes that are very interesting in this regard. So let's start with a little explanation of what temptation is in A Course in Miracles. So this is from a section called Choose Once Again. Temptation has one lesson it would teach in all its forms wherever it occurs. It would persuade the Holy Son of God he is a body, born in what must die, unable to escape its frailty, and bound by what it orders him to feel. It sets the limits on what he can do. Its power is the only strength he has. His grasp cannot exceed its tiny reach. So this idea of the body being a container for who we are, and that temptation in the Course is temptation to see ourselves and other people as their bodies, as merely this physical thing that we are contained by, and our power, what we do, cannot extend beyond its tiny reach. I can only reach here. So my power, the limits of what I can do, they exist at the end of my fingertips or the end of my body. So this idea of limitation is a big one in regards to the body and identifying with the body. And here is another section from the Course. It's from the Workbook Part 2. And it's under a title, What is the Body? The body is a fence the Son of God imagines he has built to separate parts of his self, capital S, from other parts. It is within this fence he thinks he lives, to die as it decays and crumbles. So again, this idea that the body is a fence. It bounds us off from other people. I stop where my body stops. You stop where your body stops. The world is full of separate beings, separate people. And this is the idea that the one self that we come from, and that really hasn't been disturbed, has been fractured into a gazillion separate cells. And the ego would like us to believe that that is the case, that oneness has been destroyed, and we're all now just fragments, puny little fragments of what was once a majestic self. Now, the ego in us wants to identify with the body because love, like real love, not special love, the ego, special love that wants something, that's always trying to get something from someone else or something else. Real love doesn't ask for anything, it's just extending out of what it is. The reason why the ego wants us to identify with the body is because it is afraid of love. Because within love's presence, the ego disappears, or our identification with it disappears. So it says here, again, under what is the body, within this fence, he thinks that he is safe from love. So that implies that love is a threat to us. In our unconscious mind, the ego in us perceives love, real love, as a threat. And that's why we return time and time again, even after a nice experience of peace and love, we return to an identification with the body. And that often occurs through pain or through self-sabotage. We might eat too much and feel sick. We might stub our toe. But whatever, it's something that brings our attention back to our body. I once heard someone say, and I think it might have been the teacher Ken Wapnick, may have been somebody else, say that Bill Thetford used to say, let's say he had an experience of peace and then would feel sick afterwards, that rooted attention now back to the body. He had a saying, I am a body, I am sickly, get me to a doctor quickly. So that idea that after we have an experience of expansiveness, of the strength of our spiritual self, the fear of our ego is, oh no, my special self will be annihilated now. my existence, my whole existence will be annihilated. And so we quickly root our identification again in the body. And one of the best ways to do that is pain or pleasure. We might all of a sudden become infatuated with somebody or something or a product to buy. Either way, our attention has become rooted in the world. Or we might become really fixated on politics, on what's going on outside, in a way that takes us away from our right mind. Now, this quote from the Course is an interesting one, what I'm about to read. The body saves you, for it gets away from total sacrifice and gives you the time in which to build again your separate self, which you truly believe diminishes as you and your brother meet. So just as I was talking just then about when we have an experience of joining, of peace, of love, we can then retreat back to an identification with our body. Our body saves us from feeling diminished. So after we've had that experience of joining, we feel we need to quickly build up our separate self again. So we build up that identification with our body again. And we have an investment in experiencing pleasure or pain or both. Again, anything that roots us in the body. So we join a bit, we feel that that's somehow deconstructed or diminished our separate special self. We get scared, or the ego in us gets scared, and so we rush back and try and build it all up again. Now, this is an important point because we can think, oh, I'm lonely, I'll go join with somebody else, another body, or what have you, and that will get rid of my loneliness. But there is a resistance to truly joining. There's another quote from the Course. It says, future loss may be your fear, but present joining is your dread. So joining is actually our dread. It's our ego's dread. So in any situation where we feel that we're anxious about the future, in that moment, that might be the case. Yeah, we're anxious about the future, but our real dread is of joining with the Holy Spirit within our mind. That is the ego's dread. And in that case, it's also our real dread is joining with those around us in that situation. This ambivalence about joining with other people is nicely expressed in a story about porcupines by the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. And I'm going to read it from an essay that I wrote called Mind the Gap, which is in my collection of Reflections on A Course in Miracles, volumes 1 to 3. It begins with a quote from a book called The Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys. And this is what her main character, Antoinette Cosway, says. I had two longings and one was fighting the other. I wanted to be loved and I wanted to be always alone. That's a nice expression of how we want to be in a loving relationship, and at the same time, there's something about it that doesn't appeal. We want to be alone, have our own space. The sentiment is a common one. We wish for the security, warmth, and companionship of an intimate relationship, yet they can also be stressful, so we'd prefer to be alone. The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer came up with the following story about porcupines as a metaphor for this conflict. One cold winter's day, a number of porcupines huddled together quite closely in order, through their mutual warmth, to prevent themselves from being frozen. But they soon felt the effect of their quills on one another, which made them again move apart. Now, when the need for warmth once more brought them close together, the drawback of the quills was repeated, so that they were tossed between two evils, until they had discovered the proper distance from which they could best tolerate one another. And then Schopenhauer goes on to draw an analogy between the porcupines and people, between the quills and what we find objectionable about others. So this is what he said. Thus, the need for society, which springs from the emptiness and monotony of men's lives, drives them together. but their many unpleasant and repulsive qualities and insufferable drawbacks once more drive them apart. The mean distance which they finally discover, and which enables them to endure being together, is politeness and good manners. By virtue thereof, it is true that the need for mutual warmth will be only imperfectly satisfied, but, on the other hand, the prick of the quills won't be felt. So we'll get together enough that your insults or your behaviour won't annoy me too much. I will be polite. Our politeness and good manners will keep us in a kind of a zone where we don't get too upset with each other or annoy each other too much. And that way our need for warmth is satisfied, but it's not much of a warmth, as Schopenhauer says. So it's never really that satisfactory. So now I'll read a bit further from the essay and we'll bring in a bit of A Course in Miracles. In terms of A Course in Miracles, our wish to be a separate, autonomous being is symbolically expressed in the gap between bodies. The real gap, however, is in our minds where the thought of separation lies, but, identifying with the ego, we're not aware of this and seek to relieve loneliness by joining with other bodies. All the relationships that the ego establishes are used to protect us from our loneliness. We also establish them so we can project out our guilt, thereby getting rid of it, or so we think. And this is a quote from chapter 15 in the course. In their angry alliances, born of the fear of loneliness, and yet dedicated to the continuance of loneliness, each seeks relief from guilt by increasing it in the other, for each believes that this decreases guilt in him. So, born of the fear of loneliness, yet dedicated to the continuance of loneliness. Because if the loneliness really is over, that would mean that we have joined on the level of the mind and accepted our unity. And that is the end of the ego. So the ego doesn't want us to truly get rid of our loneliness. It just wants us to keep trying to get rid of it, to keep looking out there to form these alliances between bodies as we perceive each other. And that way we can be like the porcupines. We kind of stave off a bit of the anxiety or awful feeling of loneliness, but it doesn't really scratch the itch because it can't. And the ego doesn't want us to really get rid of our loneliness. So I'll continue on with the essay. However, as long as we identify as a body, which means we're at the mercy of things we can't control, rather than as a mind that can choose to see things differently, we are identifying with the thought of separation, and so nothing will suffice as a substitute for the comfort of everything, capital E. The Course also points out, this is the interesting bit, that as long as we believe being with another body will get rid of our loneliness, we will be invested in perceiving people as bodies, which means we will only see the foibles of their ego rather than calls for help and make them into a big deal. And this is a quote again from chapter 15. As long as you believe that to be with a body is companionship, you will be compelled to attempt to keep your brother in his body and keep yourself in your body as well, held there by guilt, because that is what we see in somebody else. If we want to see them as a body, we must see them as a guilty, shameful being, because that is what constituted the body in the first place. The body is something to houses the whole idea of separation, which means the whole idea of guilt and shame. It's the embodiment of those things. According to the ego, according to the Holy Spirit, the body is a neutral thing whose main use or whose only real function is for communication. We can either communicate the thought system or project the thought system of the ego, or communicate the loving thoughts of the Holy Spirit. So that bit from the Course goes on, and you will see safety in guilt and danger in communication. So we'll see safety in guilt because that keeps the person in their body, and that therefore keeps us feeling that we have solved the issue of loneliness because now we have a companion. So being with a body is what the ego tells us will solve our loneliness. So we need to still see that person as a body. And the idea that we can communicate on the level of the mind is just not tolerable to the ego. And so the essay goes on, though we blame our annoyance on someone's characteristics or behaviour, their quills, the Course points out that our annoyance is purposive. We want to be annoyed because we need to keep a gap. We want to diminish our loneliness, but we need to keep ourselves separate. We don't want true joining because we want to be a body. We want them to be a body. Therefore, we must keep seeing guilt and shame in them. So we must therefore keep being annoyed, feeling annoyed by them, and we must keep feeling shameful and guilty ourselves. We truly feel that communicating on the level of the mind, where our shared self can be experienced and that love and peace, is a threat. And again, from the essay, we have a need to see separate interests and to push others away when the threat of communication looms. That's why the Course refers to the temptation to perceive ourselves unfairly treated. It says, beware the temptation to feel yourself unfairly treated, because that represents a wish, the temptation to perceive ourselves unfairly treated is also the temptation to see others as a body and to see ourselves as a body, which means the reluctance to see behaviour on the part of somebody else as either calling for love or expressing love. So if it's not calling for love, let's say it seems unkind, we'll be tempted to say they're a bad person, they've done a bad thing, a hateful thing, rather than that's a call for help, and I can ask the Holy Spirit to answer their call for help and my own in this moment. So now I'd like to come to a part of the Course called the call for faith. It says this: a situation is a relationship, being the joining of thoughts. If problems are perceived, it is because the thoughts are judged to be in conflict. Some idea of bodies must have entered. The thoughts of bodies is the sign of faithlessness, for bodies cannot solve anything. It is their intrusion on the relationship, an error in your thoughts about the situation, which then becomes the justification for your lack of faith. So once you've identified as a body and see the other person as a body, again, you will be just seeing their ego and your own and making that real. You then enter into the world or the perception of opposites, of we are in conflict, of victim and victimizer, and that can be expressed in you taking one side in an argument, and then that naturally generates the opposite side in the argument. If you are identified with your body, with your ego, the ego sees that the body's purpose is to attack. Therefore, the easiest way to attack in this world is to take the opposite stance to somebody else. And that's when you just get arguing. Who's right? Who's wrong? Who's the aggressor? Who's the victim? You are well into the battleground when you're identified with the body, and that means you're into the world of opposites and opposition. So how do we get beyond this idea that we are a body? Do we meditate on that? I'm not a body. Do we try and see beyond the body of somebody else? Like, how do we do this? Well, in chapter 31, under the title Recognizing the Spirit, the Course says this: Salvation does not ask that you behold the Spirit and perceive the body not. It merely asks that this should be your choice. In other words, it merely asks that you be willing to see somebody else differently, to see beyond their sin of their body. So if you are willing to do that, that means you are willing to look on them differently, look on yourselves differently, willing to perceive the whole situation differently. It's that willingness that opens up your mind to the correction of the Holy Spirit, which will just help you to see the call for love, the call for help behind somebody else's actions, and acknowledge your shared need to know of that whole unified self. There'll be some experience of that, and that will mean you'll just feel less angry towards the person, you'll feel peaceful, you'll feel loving, ultimately, and the edge, the whole emotional edge to the interaction, to the relationship will shift. Now, I thought I'd like to end this video with a look at the review sections in the workbook. And what I'm focusing on is where this idea that we're not a body fits in within the greater context of the course's curriculum. And I think the review sections provide a nice structure that shows where the idea that we're not a body fits in. So let's have a look at that. So there are 6 review sections in the workbook from A Course in Miracles. In the first review section, we practice 5 lessons that we've done before, and we practice 5 per day over 10 days. Then in the second review section and in the third review section, we practice 2 lessons that we've done previously per day over 10 days. Then when we get to the reviews 4, 5 and 6, things change. So these are the last 3 review sections in the workbook, and rather than simply reviewing lessons gone by, each of these review sections focuses on a theme. It starts with a theme that you will look at before you review previous lessons each day. Now, in section 4, the review theme is "My body holds only what I think with God." So this addresses the idea of the authority problem, that we are in conflict with God. And so this addresses the whole issue of fear and anxiety, sin, guilt, fear. So the idea that we have a different will to God's, that we want something different to God, that we are different to that oneness, that is addressed through this idea, my mind holds only what I think with God. The review section talks about us being co-creators with God. He created us and he gave us the power also of creation, which is extending love, basically. So our will is shared with God's will. There is no conflict. We both want the same thing, which is to extend what we are, which is love, and therefore we extend love. So that's what is addressed in review section 4. In review section 5, it addresses the split mind. So the mind that is sometimes loving and sometimes hating. So I say that this review section addresses our self-doubt, our uncertainty about ourselves. What are we? Are we Dr. Jekyll, the good guy, or Mr. Hyde, the bad guy? So addressing the split mind, it has this sentence: God is but love, and therefore so am I. So that's the sentence. That's the theme of review 5. So that's the thing that we repeat to ourselves before we review past lessons. God is but love, and therefore so am I. and it's the love of the spiritual self, the one self. So, Section 5, review Section 5, addressing the split mind. You are not the ego. You are not the hateful, fearful, judgmental being that is part of the split mind. You are what is associated with the right mind, and that is the one self. Now, we come to the very last review section, which is Section 6. And this is the thought that we're to hold in our minds as we go through past lessons. I am not a body, I am free, for I am still as God created me. So, this review section says that we are to remind ourselves that we have a function that transcends the world. So that's also a function that transcends the body. So the body, again, being a limitation, and our body identification is what's being addressed in this review section. But by saying I'm not a body, I am free, for I am still as God created me, that's the truth. And how we get to that truth is to remember that we have a function that transcends the world and that transcends the body. So this review section focuses on the idea of transcendence, that we are transcending the world, that we are transcending the body by practicing our function of forgiveness. So that ties in with that section from Recognizing the Spirit, that the way we see beyond the body is just to be willing to see beyond the body, which means willing to see beyond somebody's ego, and that brings in the function of forgiveness. Well, I think it's interesting that the focus on the body is in the last review. And I think that is because we are so identified with our bodies and identified with the world of form around us that it does come at the end of the workbook. Although we do address the idea of being a body throughout the workbook and the authority problem, everything kind of cycles and spirals around in the workbook and in the course. We keep revisiting things as we go along. It's not totally linear. This focus, I am not a body, I am free, I am still as God created me, comes in review number 6, the very last one. And that is because I think it is a real challenge. But the way isn't to try and look beyond the body with your eyes. It's not about using the body's eyes. It's about forgiveness, the transcendent function, the function that transcends the world of opposites. So before we were talking about how when you're in the body and really identified with the body, you are now in the world of opposites, really identified with opposition. And you take a position, if the other person is also identified with the body, it's almost like they'll just automatically take the opposite position, because bodies, according to the ego, are made for attack. That is the body's function. Well, the transcendent function, the function of forgiveness, is the function that transcends our identification with the body and need to attack. And it's by asking for help from the Holy Spirit to see the situation with His eyes that we then raise above the battleground where opposites and oppositions are playing out. And there's never a solution. There's only two sides of the equation, just like a pinball match, or a ping pong match, just going backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. And neither is right, because either is just, opposite sides of a pole. Carl Jung had a term called the transcendent third, or the irrational third, that out of a battle between opposites, something, if you are able to connect with what he called the transcendent function, which was something beyond the ego, he didn't use the terms forgiveness or think of it in the way we do as a course students. But he did have this idea that there was some aspect to us beyond the ego, a greater self that could see beyond the world of opposites, and that it's not through any rational process that we come to some resolution between the conflict down there, but a transcendent function, a transcendent aspect of the mind beyond the ego, that, and what he called an irrational third, will just emerge. And that irrational third means that it just hasn't come by reason of the intellect. It's just come, a third that somehow solves the dispute in whatever way. And remember, it only takes one person, because minds are joined, it only takes one person to ask for help to perceive things differently for the situation to change and for your perceptions to change. And if the other person is open to the healing that you've now requested for yourself and the other person, then things will shift. It only takes one. And in that asking for help is loneliness truly overcome, because you've joined with the Holy Spirit. And if you're joined with the Holy Spirit, all loneliness is gone. Thanks for watching. Tune in again. Bye.